Greece is one of those places that ruins you for everywhere else. I know that sounds dramatic, but hear me out. Once you have walked through ruins that are older than most civilizations, once you have seen a sunset paint the Aegean Sea in colors you did not think were real, once you have tasted food that makes you question every meal you have eaten before, something shifts inside you. You do not come back the same person. And today, I am going to show you exactly why. Now, before we dive in, I want you to imagine something. Imagine standing on a cliff edge. Below you, the sea is so impossibly blue it looks like someone poured sapphire ink into the Mediterranean. Behind you, white buildings cascade down a hillside like a frozen waterfall. The air smells like wild thyme and salt. A church bell rings somewhere in the distance. That is not a painting. That is not a screensaver. That is just a random Tuesday in Greece. This country has been calling to travelers for thousands of years. Literally thousands. The ancient Greeks invented the concept of sacred travel. Pilgrims would journey across the known world to visit the oracle at Delphi or compete in the original Olympic Games. Tourism is not some modern invention here. It is woven into the very fabric of what Greece is. And when you visit, you become part of a tradition that stretches back to the dawn of Western civilization. So let me take you on a journey. We're going to start where every story about Greece has to start. Athens. You cannot understand Greece without understanding Athens. This is the city where democracy was born, where philosophy was invented, where theater, mathematics, and medicine took their first shaky steps into existence. When you walk through the streets of Athens, you are walking on the same ground where Socrates argued with strangers and Aristotle taught Alexander the Great. That is not a metaphor. That is literally true. And towering above it all is the Acropolis. Now, you have seen pictures of the Parthenon, everyone has, but nothing prepares you for seeing it in person. When you climb that hill and the temple comes into full view, something happens in your chest. It is this overwhelming sense of time collapsing. This building was already ancient when Julius Caesar was alive. It was already 1,000 years old when the Roman Empire fell. And here it stands, battered and incomplete, but still breathtakingly beautiful, still commanding the skyline of a modern city of 4 million people. The best time to visit the Acropolis is early morning, right when it opens. You beat the crowds and the heat, and the light is absolutely perfect for photographs. That golden Mediterranean morning light hitting those marble columns is something you will remember for the rest of your life. But Athens is not just the Acropolis. Wander into the Plaka neighborhood, the oldest continuously inhabited area in the city. Narrow streets twist between neoclassical buildings draped in bougainvillea. Little cafes spill out onto cobblestone paths. You can sit there with a Greek coffee, which is strong enough to wake up your ancestors, by the way, and just watch the world go by. Street musicians play. Cats lounge in doorways. Old men argue about politics at tiny tables. It feels like stepping into a living, breathing postcard. Then there is the food. Oh, the food in Athens. Fresh grilled octopus with a squeeze of lemon. Spanakopita straight from the oven, the phyllo dough shattering at the slightest touch. Souvlaki from street vendors that somehow taste better than any expensive restaurant meal you have ever had. And the olive oil. Greek olive oil is on another level entirely. They drizzle it on everything, and honestly, they are right to do so. Now, from Athens, most travelers make their way to the islands, and this is where Greece transforms from impressive to absolutely magical. Let me talk about Santorini first, because it is the one everyone thinks of. And yes, it lives up to the hype. Completely, Santorini is actually the rim of an ancient volcanic caldera. The entire island is essentially the edge of a massive crater that filled with seawater after one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history, roughly 3,500 years ago. Some historians believe this eruption may have contributed to the collapse of the Minoan civilization and could even be connected to the legend of Atlantis. So when you are standing in the village of Oya, watching the sunset, you are standing on the edge of a geological catastrophe that may have inspired one of the most enduring myths in human history. If that does not give you chills, I do not know what will. The architecture of Santorini is iconic for good reason. Those white cubic buildings with blue domed roofs were not designed by some trendy architect. They evolved out of practicality. The white paint reflects the brutal summer heat. The cave houses carved into the cliff face stay cool naturally. The blue domes mark the many small churches scattered across the island. Beauty born from necessity. There is something profoundly Greek about that. Santorini is also a wine lover's paradise. The volcanic soil produces grapes you cannot find anywhere else in the world. The Assyrtiko grape in particular thrives here, producing crisp white wines with an almost mineral quality that pairs perfectly with fresh seafood. Visit a winery perched on the Caldera Rim, taste a glass of Assyrtiko while overlooking the sea. And tell me that is not one of the finest moments a human being can experience. But I want to let you in on something. As stunning as Santorini is, the real magic of Greek islands often lies in the lesser-known ones. Take Milos, for example. This island in the Cyclades has some of the most extraordinary beaches you will ever see. We are talking about Sarykiniko, a lunar landscape of smooth white volcanic rock sculpted by wind and waves into surreal shapes that look like they belong on another planet. The contrast between the bright white stone and the deep turquoise water is almost hallucinogenic, and unlike some of the more famous spots, you can often have stretches of these beaches mostly to yourself, especially if you visit in the shoulder season of May or early October. Or consider Naxos, the largest of the Cycladic islands. Naxos has everything: beautiful beaches, ancient ruins, mountain villages, incredible local cheese and potatoes that are famous throughout Greece. There is a massive marble gateway called the Portera, standing alone on a peninsula, the unfinished entrance to a temple of Apollo that was never completed. At sunset, you can frame the entire harbor through this ancient doorway. It is one of the most photographed spots in all of Greece, and for very good reason. Then there is Crete, which honestly deserves an entire video of its own. Crete is the largest Greek island, and it feels almost like its own country. The Cretans have a fierce independence and a culture that runs deep. This is where the Minoan civilization flourished over 4,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest centers of advanced civilization in Europe. Visit the Palace of Knossos, and you are walking through what many consider to be the birthplace of European culture. The Minoans had running water, multi-story buildings, and elaborate art centuries before mainland Greece reached similar levels of sophistication. The famous legend of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth is connected to this very place, and when you see the maze-like layout of the palace ruins, you can understand how that myth might have been born. But Crete is not all ancient history. The Samaria Gorge is one of the longest gorges in Europe, a 16-kilometer hike through towering canyon walls that narrow to just 4 meters wide at certain points. It is challenging and exhausting and absolutely magnificent. The gorge empties out at a small coastal village where you can collapse into a taverna, order fresh fish and a cold beer, and feel like you have genuinely earned it. The cuisine of Crete deserves special mention. The Cretan diet is considered one of the healthiest in the world. It centers around olive oil, wild greens, fresh vegetables, legumes, and moderate amounts of cheese, meat, and wine. Researchers have studied Cretan villages for decades, trying to understand why the people there live so remarkably long. The answer seems to be a combination of diet, physical activity, strong social bonds, and perhaps some genetic luck. But whatever the reason, eating in Crete feels like nourishing your soul as much as your body. Now let me shift gears and take you somewhere completely different. The mainland of Greece holds wonders that many visitors miss entirely because they rush straight to the islands. Meteora is one of the most jaw-dropping places on Earth. Full stop. Massive natural stone pillars rise hundreds of meters from the ground, and perched on top of these impossible columns of rock are medieval monasteries that look like they were placed there by the hand of God. The monks who built these retreats in the 14th century were seeking isolation and closeness to the divine, and you can see why they chose this spot. The landscape does not feel like it belongs in Europe. It feels like something from a fantasy novel. 6 of the original 24 monasteries are still standing and open to visitors. To reach them, you climb steep staircases carved into the rock face. Inside, you find centuries-old frescoes, quiet courtyards, and an almost overwhelming sense of peace. The monks who live here still maintain a contemplative existence, and there is something about the energy of these places that quiets even the most restless mind. I have to tell you about Delphi as well. In the ancient world, Delphi was considered the center of the universe. The Greeks called it the navel of the world. People traveled from across the Mediterranean to consult the oracle, a priestess who supposedly channeled the god Apollo to deliver prophecies. Kings and generals made no major decisions without first seeking the oracle's guidance. Today, the archaeological site of Delphi sits on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, surrounded by olive groves and dramatic mountain scenery. The ruins include the Temple of Apollo, an ancient theater, and a stadium where the Pythian Games were held. Walking along the sacred way, the path that ancient pilgrims followed up to the temple, you can almost feel the weight of the countless prayers and hopes that were carried along this road over the centuries. The museum at Delphi houses one of the most famous sculptures in the world, the Charioteer of Delphi, a bronze statue from around 470 BC. that is so lifelike and so perfectly preserved that it takes your breath away. The eyes are made of inlaid stone and glass, and they seem to look right through you across 25 centuries. Let me bring you to the Peloponnese next. This peninsula, connected to mainland Greece by a narrow land bridge, is absolutely packed with historical treasures. The ancient city of Mycenae, home of the legendary King Agamemnon, who led the Greek forces in the Trojan War, sits brooding on a hilltop. You enter through the Lion Gate, one of the oldest monumental sculptures in Europe, and inside the citadel walls you can see the royal burial circles where golden death masks were discovered in the 19th century. When the archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann found one particularly stunning mask, he reportedly telegraphed the king of Greece saying, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." Whether that mask actually belonged to Agamemnon is debatable, but the drama of the moment is pure Greece. The ancient theater of Epidaurus in the Peloponnese is another marvel. Built in the 4th century BC, it seats 14,000 people and has acoustics so perfect that a person whispering on stage can be heard clearly in the very last row. No microphones, no speakers, just ingenious architecture that we still do not fully understand. Performances are still held here during the summer months, and attending a Greek tragedy in this setting, under the stars, in a theater built specifically for this purpose over 2,000 years ago, is one of the most moving cultural experiences available anywhere on the planet. And I have to mention Olympia. This is where it all started. The original Olympic Games were held here beginning in 776 BC and continued for over 1,000 years. Athletes from across the Greek world would compete in running, wrestling, chariot racing, and other events. Wars would be paused so that competitors could travel safely, and the games were that important. Walking through the ruins of ancient Olympia, you can see the remains of the gymnasium where athletes trained, the temple of Zeus that once housed one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the original running track where the very first Olympic foot race was held. If you stand at the starting line and look down that track, knowing that countless athletes stood in this exact spot, striving for glory nearly 3,000 years ago, the hair on the back of your neck stands up. Now I want to talk about something that does not get enough attention when people discuss Greece. The people themselves. Greeks are some of the most hospitable people you will ever meet. There is a word in Greek, philoxenia, which literally translates to love of strangers. It is not just a concept, it is a deeply held cultural value. In ancient Greece, hospitality was considered sacred, a divine obligation. Zeus himself was the protector of travelers and guests. And that tradition is not faded. If you visit a small village in Greece and sit in a taverna, there is a very real chance someone will send a plate of food to your table or insist on buying you a drink. If you ask for directions, a local might walk you all the way to your destination rather than just pointing. In rural areas especially, being welcoming to visitors is not just politeness, it is a point of honor. I remember reading about a traveler who got lost in a mountain village and an elderly woman invited him into her home, fed him a full meal, gave him directions drawn on a napkin, and refused to accept any payment. She said it would bring shame on her house to take money from a guest. That story captures something essential about the Greek character. The pace of life in Greece is also something worth noting. Greeks have a relationship with time that feels fundamentally different from what most of us are used to. Meals are long, conversations are unhurried, the afternoon rest is still observed in many places. Coffee is not something you grab on the run. It is something you sit with for an hour while watching the world. There is a wisdom in this approach to living that many of us in faster-paced societies have lost. Greece can help you find it again if you let it. Let me come back to the natural beauty because I have not done it justice yet. Greece has over 6,000 islands and islets, though only about 200 are inhabited. The coastline stretches for roughly 16,000 kilometers, which is extraordinary for a country its size. This means beaches. Endless, glorious, wildly varied beaches. You have the pink sand beach of Elefonici in Crete, where the sand literally glows rose-colored in the sunlight. You have Navaggio Beach on Zakynthos, the famous shipwreck beach enclosed by towering limestone cliffs that you have definitely seen in photographs, even if you did not know its name. You have the hidden coves of Kefalonia, the black volcanic beaches of Santorini, the long sandy stretches of Rhodes, and countless unnamed little patches of paradise that you stumble upon when you rent a boat and just explore. The water clarity in Greece is remarkable. In many places you can see straight to the bottom, even in water that is 10 or 15 meters deep. Snorkeling and diving are extraordinary throughout the islands. Underwater caves, ancient shipwrecks, colorful marine life, and visibility that stretches on and on. The Mediterranean has been overfished in many areas, but Greece still has pockets of genuine marine abundance, particularly around some of the more remote islands. And then there are the mountains. People forget that Greece is one of the most mountainous countries in Europe. Mount Olympus, the legendary home of the gods, rises to nearly 3,000 meters. You can actually hike to the summit, and the trek takes you through dense forests, alpine meadows, and exposed rocky ridges. Standing on the peak where the ancient Greeks believed Zeus held court, looking out over a sea of clouds, is a spiritual experience regardless of your beliefs. The Vikos Gorge in northwestern Greece is another natural wonder that often gets overlooked. Listed in the Guinness Book of Records at one point as the deepest gorge in the world relative to its width, it cuts through the Zagori region, an area of stunning stone villages, arched bridges, and forested mountains that feels untouched by the modern world. I should talk about the seasons because when you visit Greece matters enormously. Summer is the obvious choice and the most popular, but July and August bring intense heat and massive crowds, especially on the famous islands. Prices peak and so do temperatures, regularly exceeding 35 degrees Celsius. The shoulder seasons are where the real magic happens. Late April through June and September through mid-October offer warm weather, manageable crowds, lower prices, and seas that are still perfectly swimmable, especially in the fall. Spring brings wildflowers that carpet the hillsides in color. Autumn brings the grape harvest and some of the most stunning light you will ever photograph. Even winter has its charms. Athens and the mainland destinations are far less crowded, and you can experience a side of Greece that most tourists never see. Mountain villages dusted in snow, cozy tavernas with roaring fires, ski resorts on the slopes of Parnassus or Olympus. It is a different Greece entirely, but no less beautiful.